I got some good news and I got some bad news. The good news, I am the bad news. And in this video, I'm gonna show you the right way to spray paint, and then I'm gonna show you the process I use to spray paint all the plastic interior pieces in the slap box, which is my 2011 Scion XB car audio build. It's not a race car, it's a bass car. So for my car, I pretty much wanted the paint to be as loud as the bass, but I don't have a paint gun, I don't have a compressor, and I don't really have the budget to pay somebody else to do it. So pretty much spray paint was gonna be the way. This is all you need right here. Another reason I really wanted to use spray paint was because it just makes it easy. Say I wanna do some upgrades in the future, like I wanna spray paint some more stuff, or I wanna do some touch-up work if something gets damaged, I can just go to the store and buy some spray paint. It's simple, you know, accessible. Why not? But whether you're trying to transform your interior, you're repairing some damage, or you're just giving some new life to an old car, the process is gonna be the same regardless of what interior plastics you're painting. A lot of people will say that you can't get a good paint job out of a can, but most of the time the reasons they feel that way comes down to poor execution. The paint will start flaking, there'll be runs in it, or they leave fingerprints and handling marks when they're touching it, and they blame the paint. But usually they didn't do enough prep work, if they did any at all. They didn't use proper spray technique when they actually painted the pieces, and then they didn't let it dry long enough before handling it. Luckily, avoiding these mistakes is really easy with proper technique and prep work. That's really all it comes down to. So first we're gonna talk about some general spray painting techniques, and then I'll take you through the process of painting interior trim in detail, because there's a couple steps that apply specifically to plastics that you'll really need to know, and you really wanna make sure you do a good job on. Something like that. So first, make sure your can is shaking well. I know this sounds like a really basic step, but it's actually something that a lot of people miss. Most of the time, the back of the can will say at least 60 seconds, and they're not playing. You want that paint to be really well mixed. So make sure you do actually shake the can for like 60 seconds, and don't play around with it, you know, like get in there. Next, when you're actually painting, make sure you press down on the cap when you're pointing away from the piece that you're painting, go across the piece that you're painting, and then release the cap when you're clear of the piece. Each pass, press down, release, press down, release. You can kind of see in the video, I release after each pass once the paint is off of the material, because you really want the can to be moving whenever there's paint coming out of it. And the reason for that is you don't want too much spray paint going to one spot at any particular time. So you want the can to be in motion when the paint's coming out of it. That brings us to something that you never want to do. You pretty much never want to go back and forth while holding down the button and over your piece. Just make sure that if you're gonna go back and forth, that you give a good little distance between the piece and where you turn around at. That part where you turn around, that's getting a lot of paint all at once, and that's almost guaranteed to leave a run. When it looks like the paint job is dripping, that's a run in the paint. And like I said, this is also one of the reasons that you start off the piece and end off the piece, is so that you can avoid leaving runs in the paint. It's also really important to try to keep the can as straight as possible. Now sometimes just to get to the pieces, or like if you use a table the way I did, you'll end up having to point it down, but you still don't want to point it straight down. Generally speaking, you want to keep the can as vertical as possible. That being said, you pretty much never want to spray it upside down, because when you do that, you're actually just spraying the stuff that makes the paint spray out without the paint. You're kind of just ruining your can. Along with holding it straight, it's equally important that you hold it an even distance from the piece that you're painting. I usually use about 10 inches so that the paint has enough room to spread out a little bit, and that's pretty much what most of the cans will say as well. If you hold it too close, you end up getting drips. So a constant distance, and also at a medium speed. But as you'll see in the footage, I'm going a little faster than you probably want to. The main reason for that, I'd rather have to do a couple extra passes because my coats were so light than to have one pass that's so heavy that now I have a run in my paint. Learn from experience. Sucks. To actually do the painting, you want to make sure you're spraying in even horizontal passes, and you want your passes to overlap by about 25 to 50%. You want your second pass to cover up part of your first pass. So to recap the spray painting techniques before we apply them to our interior pieces, you want to shake the can for at least 60 seconds. This is actually important. You want to make sure that you start off the piece and end off the piece. Third is you want to make sure you hold the can vertically as you can. Obviously, depending on conditions, you're gonna have to get a little bit of angle out of it, but keep in mind that the more vertical it is, the better it'll work. You want to maintain a medium speed about 10 inches away, and you want to do horizontal passes that overlap each other by about 25 to 50%. To apply what we learned to our interior pieces, the first step is obviously we got to remove them from the car. This is when I recommend you have some plastic pry tools. Hold on. Gotta grab them out of my tool bag. So for this part, I recommend you have some plastic pry tools. You don't need these, but it definitely makes taking interiors apart a lot easier without risking damaging the plastic. If you use a metal screwdriver, there's a very likely chance that that metal is gonna put like some kind of indentation or scratch or something like that in the plastic. Trust me, been there, done that. To take apart your interior, you're probably just gonna need some plastic pry tools, some screwdrivers, and maybe a 10mm, something like that, depending on what piece you're taking out. Every car is gonna be a little different, but most cars are similar. Every car is gonna have different clips or different places that they put the clips and stuff like that. But generally speaking, all plastic interior pieces, especially on newer cars, you can pretty much just pull them apart. It's literally like grabbing some stuff and, you know, yanking it up. As long as you can get something under the panel you're trying to take off, you can pretty much just pry it off a little bit and it'll start popping out. Once your pieces are removed, it's time for one of the most important steps in the whole process, the prep work. For plastic interior pieces, and this is really for any kind of plastic, honestly for any kind of thing you're painting that's already finished. So it already has a paint job, it already has some kind of coating. This is pretty much the process that you're gonna need to use. If you look at plastic and it's shiny, that's some kind of coating that keeps it shiny. That's like a wax or something like that. So you need to sand that off. So 400 grit sandpaper is pretty much all you need. If you need to use sandpaper and you don't have a sander, I would just grab a sponge, wrap some sandpaper around it, and what this does is it distributes the pressure a little more evenly than if you just used your fingers. If you do it by hand, I wouldn't get all the way down to the raw plastic. I would just get everything scuffed up so that like it's nice and dull, you know? Something like that. And then that will allow the primer to stick on later. The prep work is also what keeps your paint from flaking. So you'll see sometimes you can tell it's a spray paint job because it flakes. And most of the time, the reason it didn't flake is because there was no prep work. Sanding down the material first is what allows the paint or the primer that you spray to actually like adhere to that material, because that coating or that paint job that it already has is gonna pretty much be like a shell around it, and you're just painting the shell. It doesn't stick to that as well as it sticks to the raw material. If you do this enough, I'd definitely recommend getting a sander. This is the one I got, because it makes it 100 times easier. You'll literally spend like an hour on a piece. It'll take you like a minute with a random orbit sander. It's not nothing fancy. I mean, you have to have like the battery. The tool itself is like 60 bucks or something like that. And if you do this enough, it's 100% worth it. This is the only one I've actually used, so I can't compare it to any other ones. I'm happy with it. It gets the job done so much faster. It kind of like opens up the doors, because now the prep work is easier. So now it's not like, oh, I gotta sand these pieces. Now I get the idea, bust it out right there and paint it the same day. You know what I mean? Like, it makes the process a lot faster. So if you plan on doing this a lot and it's in your budget, 100% get a sander. Random orbit sander too, not a belt sander. You want something where the paper is constantly moving in different directions so you don't put gouges in the material that you're sanding. I wasn't about to let Victor go like that. You know we had to give Victor right. And again, it's entirely possible to do this by hand. It's just so much easier and faster with a sander. That's just what it is. Not sponsored, that's not a commercial. I'm just saying, that's just the reality. It doesn't have to be that one. Anyway, once the surface is sanded, you want to grab some alcohol and a microfiber towel. You want to wash it off really good, make sure it's clean and ready for paint. After everything is clean and dry, it's ready to be painted. I usually use like an old table and just some spare wood to crop up my pieces in such a way that the surface I'm painting is kind of easy to get to. It's also really handy, and you'll see sometimes I use a bar stool, literally these same ones I'm sitting on. You're like, oh, he's been sitting down this whole time? I use a bar stool and just put like a trash bag over it so that the bar stool's protected, and then I'll put a piece of wood on top of that as like my actual surface, just to protect everything. If anybody has any suggestions, please feel free to enlighten me on some easier ways, or like the right way, whatever. And that goes for anything I'm saying. If anybody knows better than me, please feel free to educate all of us. I'm sharing what I learned. I got some good results in my car, so I wanted to share them with the world. So you also want to try to avoid having any of the surface that you're painting touching any of the surface that it's sitting on. You pretty much just want to make sure that the surface that you're painting isn't touching anything at all that you don't intend to paint. You do, however, want to make sure that your piece is supported, because you're going to be spraying a total of 9 coats. The reason it's 9 coats is because it's 3 each of primer, paint, and clear. The reason we're using all 3 instead of just paint is just because it's going to give a better result. I know it sounds like a lot more work, but honestly, if you want the best results, it's worth it. It's worth the extra work, and it's worth the extra, you know, couple bucks you're going to spend depend on the primer and the clear. Even if you're using a 2-in-1 primer and paint, I still recommend using a standalone primer beforehand. Using an actual primer has just worked better. And clear is not only for getting a glossy look, that's just what this one does. There's also matte clears if you don't want the glossy look, but you want your paint to be sealed and protected, which is actually what clear is for. Clear is for sealing and protecting the paint, so keep that in mind. Every coat we're gonna do is gonna be pretty light. We're gonna be trying to essentially get just enough to get full coverage. Spraying the primer is the same as spraying the paint and the clear. You're just gonna do the horizontal coats that we talked about, overlapping by 25 to 50%. You're gonna wait 15 minutes in between coats, and this is for the entire process. So essentially the painting process, once you start it, you're gonna keep going for about, I don't know, maybe 2.5 hours, I think. You're essentially gonna spray for a while, wait 15 minutes, lay your second coat, wait 15 minutes, lay your third coat, wait 15 minutes, and start on your first coat of paint. And then you follow the same process.
No clear yet, just paint.
And then do the same for clear. After you've sprayed all of your chemicals and all your stuff, you're gonna wanna let it wait for an absolute minimum of 24 hours. But honestly, I feel like if you have the patience, I would let it wait for at least 48. My minimum is 48. I try not to touch things after I've painted them for at least 48 hours, just to make sure that that paint is completely cured, completely dry, because if you don't do that, that's how you end up putting fingerprints and handling marks in the paint job that you just did, and that's like frustrating. If you can, just don't mess with it. For reinstallation, again, after 2 or 3 days, just be really careful with your parts. It's spray paint. It doesn't have the same properties that are in the paint that goes on your car that allow it to cure and be like a solid shell. So still treat it kind of fragile. Try and hold it from the back as much as possible. I use the clips that you use to install it. I tend to hold it by those or something else if I can. You know, I try to just avoid touching the painted surface at all costs. If you do need to touch it to actually like push it back in, I would recommend using like a microfiber or something like that, and even still being like really gentle. If you're wondering, spring green, that's the official The Slapbox color for whatever that's worth. Shout out to Rusto. If you guys want to strike something up, I'm open. And again, like, it's obviously not gonna be the same as a professional paint job with like a paint gun and a compressor and like somebody who knows what they're doing. But like for anybody watching to be able to just like, you know what? I wanna give my car a fresh look, or I wanna like revitalize the look it had. Do that shit. I've done my car now. We did my girlfriend's Scion TC. We did my homie Victor's Mazda 3. It's very easy to get a paint job that like, oh shit, okay. It'll make you instantly like, damn, I'm glad I did that. For coming out of a can, I am very happy with it, and I'm sure you will be too when you do it to your car. Coming up, I wanna do some more how-to videos. I don't know exactly which ones I'm gonna be doing. Any suggestions? I want to do some more build updates. I got some projects that have been sitting around for a minute that I want to finally start like putting into place. So, and definitely a lot more watching me learn stuff the hard way so you don't have to. What the f is that? That's a big thing on this channel. Thanks for watching. I hope you learned something. I hope you were inspired to rip your interior apart and give it a new paint job. Shout out to the return viewers, of course. And I really hope to see you on the next one. I hope you subscribe to see more. Speaking of seeing more, if you'd like to see more in between the YouTube videos, check me out on Instagram and TikTok at DaBadNewz, DaBadNewz. It's spelled the same way as the YouTube channel. And that's pretty much the only place that you can see the work as it's happening, because that's where, you know, I post stories. And I'm actually considering going live. I can go live on TikTok. So if anybody wants to see me go live, you know, working on the Slapbox, let me know. Let me know in the comments if that's something that folks would actually be interested in. And again, that's something I can't actually do on YouTube yet. That's something I can only do on TikTok. So if that's something you want to see, that's where it's gonna have to be. Yeah, I think that pretty much covers it for this one. So always hear the bad news first. Skirt. Anybody be interested in a what's in my tool bag video?
I can f with later. Hey,